Welcome, guys, to the Dodgy Idealist. Today I have a recurring guest with me, Siv. Last week we had a discussion on ethics, and tonight we're going to continue that discussion on the free market. And the question we left hanging there was, is a free market really free, even in the most free possible system? And Siv, I'm going to begin right now. Can a free market really exist? A totally free market, even in the most free system?
Yeah, well, that's the question, huh? It's the one that stumped us a bit last week. But I think we checkmated ourselves on that one.
Yes, yes, indeed we have. Because if I remember correctly, from our discussion last week, I said, well, for me, the free market, an example of the free market, is the black market.
Yes, we made that distinction, but I think because this distinction exists, that's a good sign that it's two distinct things. I mean, the black market operates underneath the free market. And I think the important thing to note about a free market is that it's not a free floating market.
All right, okay. All right, I need to ask you to maybe elaborate a bit on that. What would you mean with a free floating market?
Well, the idea of a black market is actually a free floating market.
All right.
So that is a market that has no basis in the country's political system, the country's economic system. It operates as a complete separate entity. So that would be a free floating market.
Another
But
one.
a free float.
Sorry.
Yes.
So in other words, a market that isn't regulated by the tax system or the people within that country, or not even in a country. Let's make it smaller. Let's keep it small within a city.
Yeah, well, I mean, the black market is not beholden unto anything. It operates outside of a market.
But can it really? Because I mean, you are trading goods on that market.
Yes, you are trading goods, but remember, the whole point of last week's discussion was to say that in terms of society, ethics will determine the economics and politics. So what you're doing now is you're removing that entire flow, and you're operating this market in a complete abstract. So it has no grounding or basis inside the area that it's actually serving. So that is a free floating market.
So in other words, it's okay. I understand. So it's a market not really supported by the society's ethical structure, we can say.
Exactly. It's not beholden unto anything, not to ethics, not to the political system, nothing. It's even the information that's contained in the free market and exchange there, it operates separate to that.
Yes, because in a free market, we find ourselves, with one cardinal right, I would say. Let's take, for example, private property rights. And you can apply that to persons. Like every person is their own, is their own property. But in a black market, what we have already seen in past examples was, for example, the illegal slave trade, which would go against something like that.
Yes, absolutely. It's got no basis in the rules that govern that geographical area, which is society, which is the political system.
So then, now my question is, if there is some regulation on the free market, which we both agree there must be because it has to conform to society's ethics, right? What difference then is there between the free market and the controlled market or the communist market?
Well, you see, that's the thing. It's not quite the same thing. I mean, in terms of a regulated market and a market that acts inside the confines of, say, a right structure. It's not the same thing, because in terms of legal and illegal, say in an individual right structure, when something is illegal, it's only when it is infringing on a person's rights. Now, in a controlled market, you've got regulation on the market. So you've got regulation on the producers and you've got regulation on the laborers. Now, in an individual rights system, those controls don't exist, which obviously will bring us some uncomfortable questions.
Which questions would that be?
Well, last week you brought up the subject of, say, drugs or even prostitution would one. Even selling your kidneys would be something that would be allowed under a free market.
So
That's a bombshell.
yeah, that's something that we've seen, for example, or what was rumored to have happened in China. So
With regards to?
with regards to the selling of organs, of bodily
Yes.
organs, and in my view is, and also in some parts of the Middle East, if I recall correctly, Iran, Iraq, maybe. I could be corrected in that, but I do know a Middle Eastern country also has this issue where people are selling their organs on the black market.
Yes, kidneys specifically, because obviously you only need one.
Yeah, you only need one. But I don't know. I need both sometimes. I'm a very, very irresponsible person sometimes, but that's just me. Not kids. Don't do what I do. All right. Don't learn from my example how not to behave. Um,
But you know,
but
those uncomfortable questions, if you think about it, they're not that uncomfortable. Because if you think about what happens in the void of a legitimate market, so say in a black market,
hmm,
then the outcomes of making those things illegal becomes a lot worse. I mean, we've seen it just now with, you know, the National Crash Command Council making alcohol and cigarettes illegal.
yes,
I mean, that is how prohibitions obviously lead to criminality. That's just an obvious trade-off.
yes,
And I mean, prohibition in America created gangsters.
yes.
It creates organized crime.
Indeed, because remember, and this is something that people need to remember. In this case, in the black market, the prices are artificially increased, not because it's an ask any price and you'll just have to accept it. I mean, yes, that's also something to do with the increase, but it's also to do with the risk factor, right? Because it's more risky for the how can I say it, the mobster to sell his moonshine on the black market than it is for the liquor store owner to sell his liquor legally within the economic system. So you are
Exactly. So I mean,
we to touch again on the NCC, for example, like you pointed out, we saw an increase in artificial pricing or in pricing. Instead of and this is something that because I'll admit this as well, I've been dabbling a bit in the illegal trade scene, but for a bottle of Richelieu, which by the way I do not drink, for a bottle of Richelieu,
yeah.
normally you would pay like $140 max, right?
Yep.
Then on the black market, that price climbed up until 400 Rand per bottle.
Wow.
So we can already
I think I've
see,
seen it even higher.
yes, and in some cases it probably was higher, but because again, you're paying for the risk factor. And this is things that, for example, the NCC did not take into consideration. It's the effect that this would have not only on the producers, but also the consumers. Because now you have to pay more than twice the price of what you would normally pay, which means you're poorer off.
Yes, definitely. Well, I mean, I think it's a general good rule of thumb that whatever the government makes a law to try and stop is usually the outcome it will affect. So if they want people not to drink and smoke so as to save money, they'll end up creating a situation where people will still continue to drink and smoke and have no money because they are paying inflated prices.
Yes.
It's just one of those things.
And this is very interesting as well. So, for example, in Russia, after the Soviets or after the uprising, the revolt, or whatever you want to call it, after they displaced the Tsars and all of that, and Soviet Russia basically came to being under Lenin,
Yeah.
they had the same sort of issue with prohibition as well, but a moral sort of way. All right, in a moral sort of way or in an ethical sort of way. So the government
Okay.
cracked down because they believed that the Tsar or the king kept the peasantry drunk or the proles drunk in order to keep power over the proles. But that led to a lot of other issues, right? So that led to illegal distilling and illegal um, selling of the alcohol product or the cheap vodka that they created. This had a lot of other health concerns as well, which overloaded the health system in Russia at some point. Eventually, when Lenin, kicked the bucket and Stalin came in, he reversed some of the policies and he brought back the distilleries and he legalized, if that even exists, the consumption of alcohol as well as the production of alcohol. But he also nationalized it.
Of course you would.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. But I had to put it there because I do deal with Nazis as well. So, so yeah, it's very interesting. I find that when governments try to control the market, they usually disguise it as an ethical reason for the greater good. What are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
well, when you see what I've noticed with regards to the law, and especially the law, is that it's become an attempt to legislate risk
Hmm.
out of life. It's an attempt to legislate safety into life. I
Hmm.
mean, if you look at, say, the climate change fiasco that's been going on, it's very much the same as the actions that the NCC took.
Hmm.
And that's to say that, okay, if we don't institute this piece of legislation, you're all going to be at risk. And I mean, sometimes that risk isn't material,
Hmm.
you know, like their exact um, argument for, say, stronger labor rights is to protect the workers. There's always this paternal language that gets used, that the state is there to protect us from all risk in life. And the only way to do that is to try and legislate it out of life.
Indeed. And last week on Chris White, for example, I commented on something very likened to that. I said, in America, for example, he did correct me, obviously, but he did get the gist of it. I said that America guarantees the pursuit of happiness. It does not guarantee happiness in and of itself. It's very much the same in South Africa. Um, Instead of the pursuit of safety, guaranteeing the pursuit of safety. So, for example, the Firearms Act, which is bonkers, and self-defense laws in South Africa, or even in some cases where you have freedom of choice. It's just dictated down to you.
Mm.
Instead of that, they should leave it to the individuals to make those decisions for ourselves. If I want to, let's say, buy a gun, for example, because we are talking about safety, so let's make it a physical example. If I want to buy a gun, I don't want to jump through hoops of fire and then climb Mount Everest and then, do a somersault, backflip, back roll, whatever, just to get the license. Because that's basically what it is right now. It's an administrative nightmare. So one could argue that in this pursuit or in this guarantee of safety, markets eventually do suffer. because of arbitrary regulation. We look at carbon tax, for example, sin tax, all these other arbitrary taxes that are levied for the greater good. But honestly, it just gets shoved down on the consumer.
Yeah, always. I mean, that somebody's got to pay the piper,
Yeah,
and it's usually the people that can least afford to pay the piper that have to pay the piper.
yes, unfortunately. And unfortunately for the communist, Marxists, uh, Stalinists in power in our government, they don't really see it like that, because when you look at also when they speak, whether it's the EFF's Ndlozi or whether it's someone from the ANC, they always infantilize, is the word, the consumer or the citizen. We can
No,
also,
absolutely.
yeah, and also let's also touch on labor regulations. This is probably also why I struggle to employ people, is because of the ridiculous labor relations and labor regulations. It's utter nonsense.
It is. I mean, there's such a history of unions in this country, and in a way, I can sympathize with the direction that people approach this, um, because I mean, for quite a long while and in quite a substantial way, unions were a great force to mobilize around politically.
Mm,
So I understand the sympathy for a union, right? And in some instances, like a sort of like a trade union that you join. So
mm,
say say you have a contractual dispute with your employer, that you have this organization that you can seek advice from. I've got absolutely no problem for that.
yes.
But at the end of the day, the problem that I do have, and this is obviously an example of an unfree market,
Hmm.
is that the government is a third party to a contract between two people.
Yes.
And in the same instance, so is a union,
Hmm.
because it is no longer one entity contracting with another.
Hmm.
There's all these parties added to it. The government is there before anybody because it says, okay, this is how you hire. And the terms of the contract must stipulate this, and you can add some extra stuff. And then with regards to the unions, what you have is you have a third party that can, in effect, make unilateral changes to the contract. And if you don't accept it, then they use force and intimidation until you do.
Yes. And let's also not beat around the bush, because when they do strike, it is a show of force, it is a show of power, it is a coercive action against the free wills of the individuals within that negotiation. Um, the whole thing about negotiations is to find the middle ground between the employer and the employee. But also very important, and this is something that I'm probably going to get a bit of flack on. Ooh, my voice. Is AfriForum for me is a prime example of what a union should be. Not because they have the interest of the Afrikaners or the workers, but also because they actually or actively try to uplift the people that they represent by building schools, colleges, technicons, or colleges.
No, I'd agree with that. I mean, there's two things about AfriForm, and that is what you mentioned now, that sort of private civic organization. There's nothing wrong with that. It's
Yes.
perfect. It's a perfect model, right? Because it's voluntary.
Mm.
You can join this thing voluntary and you can leave it voluntary. You don't have to wait 5 years to vote. You don't have to strike. You just phone them up and you cancel your membership if you're unhappy about something. If you're happy with it, you give them more money as you please, right?
Yes.
But the one thing that I'd like to mention with regards to AfriForum, and I don't want to beat around the bush with this, is that they are an organization that shouldn't exist. but they are completely necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And the circumstances that make an organization like AfriForum necessary is got nothing to do with AfriForum. It's got nothing to do with white people, Afrikaans people, farmers, whatever you like. This is the situation that we're in, where force has to be met with force.
Yes. And let's also not forget, like in a free market, you should be able to hire and fire whoever you will or want, based obviously on merits, right? So you can't just fire people because you don't like them. But I think you should
Well,
be
why
able.
not?
Well, I mean, if they can do the job, sure. Why would you want to fire them? But again, if it's not worth the mental stress, yes, that's also a good point. You make a good point. Damn you, Siv. But
You see, the
but
thing is, people always go on about what protects the worker. The
yes,
contract.
yes.
The contract protects the worker.
So that's one way of looking at it. Like that's why I said you can't just fire them because there's the contract. But I don't believe that a union or the government should step in when that dispute happens. That's where I say like something like a small claims court can actually step in, like the CCMA, for example, which is supposed to be a wholly separate organization or a leg of government, like your judiciary system is, and dispute that, like an arbitrator or something, right?
Yeah.
But you should also be able to hire people based on merit, not on arbitrary regulations and policies stipulated from the government or from unions, for that matter, upon the economy. Because all you're doing is you're not enhancing the economy, you're not transforming anything, you're just shifting the unemployment, uh, how can I say, percentage from one group to another group. On the basis of what? Either on the basis of their race, religion, ethnicity, or sexuality, or even gender, for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, you should be able to hire anybody you like
Mm.
under whatever basis you want, right? But this zero sum game where there's a definite group of losers and a very definite group of winners, and those groups are determined by your Bill of Rights, that's a serious problem. I
Mm.
mean, don't you can't even talk about equality in law
Mm.
if you have something like that going on. It's a euphemism. It's a joke.
Yes, and like it's like I pinned, for example, on my Twitter feed. I pinned a section of the Bill of Rights there, for example, and the court case of Barnard versus SAPS, where she
Yeah.
was explicitly denied the promotion, even though uh, merit wise she was the most qualified, but she was disqualified from the position based on racial grounds. And the Constitutional Court ruled in the favor of the SAPS because it was fair discrimination. And these are the sort of arbitrary things that happen in a controlled economy.
Yeah, I mean, man, that case, that law, it's a farce. I mean, one line of that judgment in that case is how can we even begin to measure the indignity suffered by one white woman versus the indignity suffered by 40 million black people?
Yes. But how do you measure that? To me, it can't be measured and thus can't be used as a objective means to come to a judgment. That's my opinion on this matter. So to come back on the black market then, if a free market is governed by the society's ethics and stuff, in a black market there would be no contracts. If you get
Well,
what I
there
mean.
wouldn't be there wouldn't be any enforceable contracts.
Yes,
So you wouldn't have any recourse to law. So you could make a contract to sell your kidney, and if the guy runs off with your kidney and you didn't ask for payments up front, well, what are you going to do exactly?
precisely. Which basically means there is no contract. Because if a contract is unenforceable, then that contract does not exist. It might
Exactly.
exist in a physical form, but in a realistic form, it does not. It no longer exists because you cannot keep the other person or the other party to their word.
Absolutely. But you see, that's the thing. I mean, in under an individual rights system, the market isn't governed. I think that's the distinction we need to make. It isn't
Yes.
governed. Everybody is absolutely free to do what they do up until the point that they are infringing upon somebody else's rights.
Mm.
Because if their action is infringing on somebody's rights, then you've got a contradiction here. And the person that is doing the action and the person on the receiving end of that action can't have the same rights at the same time when this dispute is going on.
All right. You'll need to explain to the listeners on this one because you and I have talked about this quite a lot. But
Yeah, I have to say, I'm kind of regretting I brought it up because this thing makes so much sense to me in my mind. But I'm trying to think of a way that I can use an analogy that can sort of show how this goes.
all right, so
Basically,
let's do it like this, right? Let's say you own um, an empty lot of land, right? So you, as the
sure.
individual, has have property rights within this individualist system, correct?
Yes.
And in a free market, you can decide what to do with that empty lot of land. But now I come along and I put up a store or a building on that piece of land. That would be violating your right or your property rights.
Exactly. Precisely.
All right.
Now, the thing is, you both can't have an equal claim in law to the exact same thing.
Hmm.
So the thing is, now you've got a problem where the two parties' rights are in dispute,
Hmm.
and they're pushing against each other, right? So like two fists pushing against each other.
Hmm.
But a general rule of thumb is that the person who has done the action that has then infringed upon another person's right, general rule of thumb is that that person is obviously in the wrong, and their action would be invalid in that situation.
Hmm. So that's an important thing to remember as well, because like you said, and as you pointed out earlier, you can do anything within this free market as long as you do not violate another person's rights, right? So me, for example, in this free market, picketing up on your property would be violating your right. So automatically, I would be in the wrong. But now I'm going to throw a curveball because
Please.
I've listened to Nostrop Zizek, and
Jeez.
and he said, for example, property should not the concept of private property should not exist because of common heritage, if I sum it up succinctly. So how would one dispute that?
You see, the problem with Zizek is two reasons, especially with that property thing.
Hmm.
I mean, I haven't heard him say that, but the thing is, I can't watch him because I've never seen a nose abused so much by one man. But the problem that Zek is making there is that property is not owned by society.
Hmm.
Property can be owned by an individual, and then it can be owned by another individual, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
But this abstraction that all property, all the time, everywhere belongs to everybody,
Hmm.
is to say nothing at all.
Well,
Because who is this? Who is this everybody? Exactly.
yes, precisely. I mean, look, even in the strictest sense of a public company, for example, let's use our favorite company at the moment, Clicks. So Clicks is a public company, right? Because because it is a company with public shares. Anybody can buy shares within that company. correct? But it is private
Exactly.
in the sense of that neither you nor I can just walk into the CEO's office and sit in his chair and put our feet on his table. It is still a private company in that regard. It still has private property to some respect.
No, absolutely. I mean, you see, that's the ownership is clearly demarcated
Mm,
in that. So that's what I'm saying. You can hold property communally, like in a company, but the thing is, each one of those shareholders has a claim to that piece of property.
yes.
Okay, that section of the section.
Mm,
Okay, but this abstraction where you just sort of start throwing your hands out wildly and making them as wide as possible and saying everything the light touches is our kingdom, it doesn't mean anything. To say that all property belongs to everybody doesn't mean anything. I mean, in that case where I'm sitting now on my bed, can someone just come and scoot me off here?
now,
Do I not even have the right to stand where I'm standing?
precisely. Those are the sort of questions, right, that when we ask them, when you and I ask them, we rarely get earnest response. Also, by the way, nice Lion King reference there. I picked it up. Just stay away from the dark side. That's the socialists there. Um,
Yes, with the hyenas.
yes. uh, I think that was the message of that part in Lion King, by the way. But
Well,
don't.
now that you mention it, actually.
Yeah. Um, but getting back to Zizek and his view of things, right? I understand his point of view where he says, it's communal because of heritage. But on the same side, private property or the idea of property or ownership has evolved with us at some point. Because when society, and this is my belief, when society developed at some point and stage, laws had to be, or agreements rather, had to be made between what I own and what you own and how we handle the trade between that property to gain what I need and what you need.
You see, this is the murky waters that you're always wading through,
Mm,
and that is that we didn't get to start at zero.
mm,
Okay, our heritage is an imperfectly set up world.
yes,
So there's all these things that have already occurred that we have to take control of. But here's the kicker. If you decide that you want to install a Bill of Rights, okay, and you want this thing at all to make sense and it's going to be based on equality before the law, here is the line that you have to draw. Now, you have to decide whether you're going to draw it because as soon as that Bill of Rights is adopted and people are equal before the law,
mm,
all claims for damages are null and void.
mm-hmm,
Because if you want to try and institute them retroactively, like we do in our constitution with Section 9
mm,
and others, right? Now you are sacrificing the whole principle of law, making it completely useless.
yes,
So if you want any redress measures in your society, it always has to be before the adoption of a Bill of Rights. Now, I've said this more than once. We should have never adopted the Bill of Rights in 96, right?
mm,
We should have said, okay, this is the redress that we want to do. It's going to go on for this amount of years. This is the amount of money. So that way everybody knows what needs to be accomplished. And once we've accomplished that, we can say, those are the terms that have been filled. That's the contract that we signed with one another. Now, here's the cutoff, Bill of Rights, shut the hell up.
yes. It's very interesting that, like, how can I say it, that we haven't approached it like that. That we
Well, you
rather.
see, the thing is,
So I have a quote from Tom Woods here, for example. He says,
mhm.
a society that hopes to foster both justice and prosperity needs to discourage wealth acquisition via the political means and encourage it through the economic means. And I would even go as far as to say that that is probably how redress should be handled as well, right? Because redress, when you look at the actual definition of it, means to change. But currently there is no change. It's just a repeat of the past. The only change that probably you can argue for is, well, like if we really wanted to take that route, and maybe I'm going to do that just for the sake of the argument, well, it is now reversed.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said with regards to the change of power at 94 is that the only thing that is different is that it's under new management.
Yes.
That's it.
And this brings us back to our economy, for example. Like people would think that the apartheid government was capitalist. I would argue that it's not. It's very socialist or nationalist rather, for those people that have an issue with definitions, but it's very nationalist. You had to if you had a public company, you had to keep in mind the good for the nation, right? So Denel, for example, which was a private company, um, still had to keep the interest of the government at mind. Otherwise, government would have taken away their business license and created a new private, in quotes, business to which it could contract the development of military vehicles and weapons. That's one example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this idea that apartheid was capitalist and that somehow South Africa of today is capitalist, I'm just not sure what definition people are working from. I mean, if you take the dictionary definition, the means of production are owned, by the state. Okay, what about state-owned enterprises? That's a bit of a ringing bell, isn't it?
Yes, and also,
and then
well, I'll also say this: perhaps in a free market there is room for a state-owned enterprise as long as there is no regulation, law, or policy that protects the state-owned enterprise from its competitors.
Yeah, but I mean, but then you get into the fundamental question of what property could a state own? The state
Yes.
isn't anything.
Yes, because state is just the mechanism by which society expresses its political will. Oh, but even that is contentious sometimes. Okay,
Well,
but
I think the best way to state it is that the state is there to settle disputes and to protect rights, and that's that. If it has any, if you see, the thing is, its main job is to protect rights and to settle disputes.
yes,
Now, it is allowed a certain amount of force in that job.
of course.
Okay. Now, as soon as you give it another job, it's going to use the only tools it has, which is guns and courts, and it's going to use those to do the other job, which is precisely what it does. I mean, if you look at taxation is to do the second job, the social services job, right? And if you don't pay your taxes, men with guns will take you to a court.
Yes, it's definitely
This is
extortion.
the problem.
This is extortion, and I don't think like the communists or the socialists really think about it like that. To them, it's part of the social contract. You and I both listened to the podcast, or not the podcast, the conversation between Ramon Kabanak and Kyle. Did he bring up the social contract with regards to that interview? Because I know
I didn't get.
because he did bring that up in his interview on germ warfare.
Yeah, I didn't get that far into it.
So,
But I think there's two distinctions to make, and the one distinction is that, like we discussed last week, to discuss things in terms of force or the limiting of rights with a socialist, it's a lost cause.
Yes.
Okay, because they don't proceed from that ethical framework.
No.
They hold the good of society as the only moral,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an axiom. It's There's nothing else to discuss after that.
Yes.
And then I would say another larger group, and this is a much, much larger group. These are just ordinary people that were born and grew up and they saw their parents paying taxes and they pay taxes. And everybody's told them that we have to pay taxes.
Yes.
And they've never questioned it.
Yeah. Which is why also when this whole debacle of taxes being deducted automatically from your salary was never contested. While in America, I think if you had to try that within the United States of America or any other really uh, pro-federalist or pro-individualist country, they would go apeshit mad and probably torch the nearest British boat and cause the next, the second Boston Tea Party. Um, because they would have been, no, it's my duty to pay taxes, and if I don't agree with you, that's the way I petition against you. You don't petition against government by signing petitions and filling in forms and all that, or striking even in front of the union buildings because they've got tanks. Just a side note, a tank is harder than human flesh and bone. We saw that in Tiananmen Square. Um, but this also brings me to China, for example. People say that China is a free market or a more free market and a more capitalist market than it was in the past. I would argue against that. Because again, all the public companies and even the private companies to some extent within China has to be beholden to the state. So the whole TikTok ban, for example, in the US is grounded on this basis. And people would say it's just because Trump doesn't understand economics and so on and so forth. No, Trump understands it pretty well, and Trump understands that, for example, the great shareholder of what's it, TikTok, which is I think Tencent, is still beholden to the government of China. So the government can just walk in on Tencent's offices and demand all the information without the need of any legal warrant. That is not a free market.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if it was you, me, and Sheepy that started, formulating this idea, but the idea that there is any kind of free market, even in the US, it's a bit of a joke.
Yes.
I mean, what we've got what I called is socialism for those in a hurry.
Yes,
Basically. Where you don't you are a silent partner in every business, right? So you can control their trade and their production with legislation, and you get a share in their profits.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I'm not sure what definition of ownership people are working with, but if I have a business and someone is entitled to my profits and they can control how I trade, who I trade to, even the times that I trade, I would say that they're a pretty major shareholder in that business.
Yes, even though they're not on the books, they still control your business to some extent. Whether that is through government or through the arm of SARS. And this brings us now to taxation, because I believe taxation is theft.
Yeah, well, it's legalized theft. It's legalized theft.
Theft is this is like expropriation. I keep telling people that keep telling me about expropriation, even though I use the term for easier references. I absolutely despise that term because it is theft. It is theft. It is theft. It is theft. I don't care who tells me otherwise. By the way, boys and girls, if anyone tells you otherwise, they're selling you something, which is communism. Run away. Run away.
No, definitely. But I mean, you know what? When it comes to these euphemisms, because that's what they are. They are euphemisms.
Yes.
So instead of it calling it theft or extortion, we call it tax, right?
Yes.
And instead of saying taking without paying, we call it expropriation without compensation.
But here's the kicker, though, right? And listen to this, because I've got I've got a pet peeve, and it's oxymorons, right? So so it's like a state capitalist system. I hate the combination of that. And I also
Mm.
hate the word expropriate, because to appropriate means to steal in some way or form, but to expropriate means to steal back or to unsteal. Like, no.
Yeah, indeed. Where's the middle course?
Yeah, it's like I don't understand how you can say it's expropriation, because it's actually just appropriation. It's appropriation without compensation. They just say X to make it sound like a sort of like how you would put anti in front of another word to make it the opposite of.
Yeah. But I mean, if we're gonna go down the tax rate, then I think we've got like 10 minutes. Let's see if we can
Oh,
let's see if we
do
can blitz down it.
do we really want to?
Well,
Right.
yeah,
It
there
is
is one.
yeah. Sorry. Go for it.
Well, there was just one small but I think important point that I wanted to make with
Hmm.
regards to taxation, or maybe just two small points, if you will
Okay.
indulge me.
Go for it.
But the first argument that you hear with regards to taxes theft, is that okay, but how are we going to pay for roads and things like that? And the answer is, well, a lot better. It's going to be much easier. Okay, I mean, every rand we pay to the government gets highly devalued, and at
Hmm.
the end of it, we still normally pay a private company to do the job anyway.
Yes.
But we're doing it with what is the latest figure now? Is it 20 cents on the rand that's left over?
Yep. See, because most of my clients are, and like like we talked last time, most of my clients are in the tolling industry, right? And this is something
Mhm,
that the people don't know. There are very, very little roads, like the highways, like your N1 North, or your N1, N2, N3, N4, and so on, that is actually tolled by SARS. All right? A
mm,
toll is a tax on the usage of a road. Okay?
mhm,
The majority of the national roads, you're in four, you're in three, you're in two, in one, and I think even you're in six. I'm not sure on that. I'll need to check that. But the majority of your major roads, where your economic busyness is, basically, your logistics are
yeah,
being controlled by concessionaires. These concessionaires are private companies. They're public companies, but private in the sense that government does not own shares in them. They're the ones that maintain the road. We already do that.
exactly. But but that broader logic of how are we going to afford these things, right? Or how are we
Mm.
going to pay for these things? It's
Mm.
just don't understand the logic behind it.
Well,
We'll do it much better. Do you want to give grantees Evian water? We can. So if we don't have to pay an inflated government, a middle party that does very little but gets paid very much,
yes.
you know,
Yeah, and that's the thing that these guys seem to miss, because either they don't know how the system works, because every tender, everything that government does goes through a third party or goes through a main contractor, and government can still facilitate that role, right? You don't need to pay them to like how can I say it, build the road or keep the road up, or keep maintain the road. That's it, maintain the road. Because how they do it is they put the tender out, and the concessionaire upgrades the road as per the instructions of government, and government takes a portion of that to recompensate whatever it paid into the project in its initial stage, right? So there
mm,
is initial government fund, but government gets the money back at some point, right? It's not
mm-hmm,
just giving the money to this concessionaire and the concessionaire builds the road, without any costs to that entity. No, they get the money. They still need to facilitate the subcontractors and so on and so forth, and then they gradually pay the money back to the government, because the government gets a cut from the toll revenue that these people generate. It's the same with public parks. It's the same with any sort of public works that you can think of. This is how it works.
Yeah, the thing is, it's just we we do this all day, every day with almost everything else that we come into contact with.
Yes.
But when it comes to these certain things, it's like, okay, but how? How will it be done? It's not possible.
But they forget that we already do it. I usually laugh at that argument because it's so ridiculous. It's like, clearly you don't know how your own society works because you're either in a niche bubble where you only have very, very limited exposure to the mechanisms of government and how the government influences that portion of your little economic sphere, or you are totally clueless and you're in the broader scope of things.
Mm, mm.
But what
No,
was the
definitely.
second point?
This is actually the most important point. The problem with taxation is the relationship it creates between us and the government.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm sure you've seen me say this before, but if the servant, which is what you hear everybody say the government is supposed to be, our servant,
Mm-hmm.
can take its payment from you without your consent, against your protest, then it is no longer a servant.
Yes.
It is a master.
Yes.
And you are the servant.
Precisely.
Now, what drives me nuts to no end is this belief that if we vote in a different political party, that this relationship is somehow going to change. It just isn't.
No. No political party in their right mind, whether it's the Freedom Front Plus, whether it's the DA, it could even be, and I'm going to say it, and I'm very pro ZACP, even the ZACP would not think of abolishing mandatory taxation. And I'm using mandatory for a specific reason because I want taxation to be voluntary.
Agreed.
It's a means of power, it's a means of retaining power, it's a means to ensure that whatever you set out within the public sphere, the public projects like road maintenance that these guys bring up, that that you can afford to pay the people that you are going to approach. It's very important for the government in that regard. But I think
Yeah,
that
but you see
I think the main issue is that people don't think about it as critically as you do or I do, in that, but even if we do bring in another government, would it really change?
well, here's the thing. It's actually the point I wanted to make is that yes, the DA steals less.
Yes.
Okay. We aren't saying that the DA doesn't steal less, but
No.
it's so not the point.
Yeah.
Because the problem is that if you don't fix the underlying system, all you're going to have is cycles of steal a lot, steal a little bit, steal a lot, steal a little bit. Okay. But you are never going to end the cycle because it's inherent in the system.
Yes.
So yes, say the DA comes in and they rule for 2 terms and things go well, yay, ooh, and then people vote in, should I even say the EFF?
God forbid.
Right? Yeah. Then all you've done is basically just shifted the problem on a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But I mean, ladies and gentlemen, the point is not to put a band-aid on it. The problem is to fix the problem. And the only way to fix the problem is to make tax voluntary.
Yes.
Because that is the most direct and most powerful democracy that you can have. Okay? And it's immediate. If they don't pick up your dustbins on a Friday or whatever, right? You don't pay them. Trust me, they'll be along shortly. But the system we have now, where we have to go through this process of elections and you have to try and convince everybody in the country, to vote people out of power who give them balances on their SASSA cards every month, it's put us into this one party state. And we need to fix the underlying problem. We must stop looking for these quick solutions, right?
Indeed.
There's nothing that stops us from fixing the problem forever.
Indeed. See, This is also something that I want to bring up as well, because I'm starting to read up a bit on Afrikaner history as well. And in the republics, um, during, I think it was the first or second, I can't remember which one, but anyway, it was one during one of the Freedom Wars. One of
Mhm.
the republics, their citizens withheld their tax because they were not happy with how the government handled certain situations. And that enabled them to have a leg up against that government. That government had to change very, very quickly on its policies and approaches on how it handled certain situations, which gave power to the people. This is very, very important. We want people to have the power over government, not government over the people.
Exactly, and you can apply that same logic to the free market.
Hmm.
Okay, because that's what we're doing on a daily basis, right? If Clicks makes an ad that says your hair is shit, you know what? Don't shop at Clicks.
Precisely.
You're free. You're
That
free.
that is the most potent thing of a market economy. If you do not agree with the product or with the owner of that store or whatever the case may be, because they said something mean or nasty or whatever, you can vote with your money. You can take your money and you can spend it somewhere else. It's much more effective than burning down the stores. Much, much more
Or
effective.
let or in the context of a government introducing legislation,
Yes.
right? Because what is the process of getting a bill done?
They
Okay, and what
first
is
Yeah, I mean, after it's been drafted, it needs to pass through Parliament, and then it needs to go to the executive to be signed into power, into action. And there's a long, long waiting list on this already. I mean, legislation passed in 2017 is now only being signed now by the president, right? Or being thought of being signed by the president. So there's effectively a 3-year waiting period. Whereas when you vote with your money, when you actually, decide to take power through commerce, it's immediate.
exactly? And I mean that's the thing. If any private concern does something that you don't like, you can really affect them in a single day.
Yeah.
Not over the course of years, and then that's assuming that whatever bill that you've put through Parliament, makes sense, and it's not going to have repercussions that is going to take how long then to fix again.
Yes. Because for every bill that is brought there will be repercussions, and for every repercussion there needs to be another band-aid, and so on and so forth. And I think we're already looking as a society like the walking dead, or at least a mummy of some sort, with all the band-aids that we have on ourselves.
No, absolutely. I mean, we are just constantly fixing superficial problems on the periphery,
Yes.
and we're not getting to the root cause of these problems,
Hmm.
and we misdiagnosing the root causes of these
Oh,
problems.
most definitely. And we're hoping that government would be able to control these issues for us, which is why we always have this sort of idea that we need more government interference within our economy, within our private lives, and so on and so forth. Guys, we really do not need that. We don't need a government to tell us when we need to work, what businesses may work, we may trade or not trade, as long as it does not violate another human being's rights. And we certainly do not need government interference in our hiring and firing practices. That's why we have contracts. That's why we have lawyers. That's why we have the court system.
Precisely.
All right. Is there anything else, last minute thoughts that you want to add?
Well, I think the last minute thought I would have is would come back to civic organizations, right? So the one thing that would be very useful for people in a free market economy is information. It would be useful for the businesses, it would be useful for the consumers, the producers, the laborers, everybody. Information. So if somebody is, say, price fixing, we don't need a law to fix it. We just need somebody to realize it, to pick it up and to say, hey guys, looks like these guys are price fixing.
Mm.
You might want to shop somewhere else. Or, hey guys, this employer is telling their employees to work 80 hours a week, plus overtime, no holidays.
Mm.
You probably don't want to work there, right? And in that way, we can actually create a civil society,
Yes.
not one that is this vertical mass above us that tells us what we must and must not do, but that we can make up our own minds. The only thing we need is information, and we don't need the government for information. We don't.
Mm. And to end this on that bombshell, um, this is why we have sites like Hello Peter, for example. I mean, you paste or post something on Hello Peter very negatively of whatever company it is that you are aiming at, whether their service was crappy or whatever the case may be, and they generally get back to you within a few hours to try and rectify it because the company's reputation is more important than the laws that it follows, if that makes sense.
Uh, Absolutely.
All right.
Indeed.
So I think we have our next topic, if that would interest you. Um, Civic organizations.
Sounds interesting.
Right, so if you're up for that, I think that would be our next topic. Ladies and gentlemen, if this also interested you, please hit that like button, please subscribe, please visit Siv's YouTube channel, subscribe to his channel as well. Very interesting short video that he did on the last topic, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm also very, very jealous of his introduction music. He's got talents, this man has. And also, please follow him on Twitter. I'll link everything in the description below. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, peace and see you on the next one.
Cheers.